What is your "we will never speak of this again" moment? When I was 17, a huge photo radar ticket came in for my truck. Something like 40 kilometers over the speed limit. My mom was furious at me. "How dare you drive like a maniac, I raised you better" and all that. But it turns out I wasn't the driver that day. Dad had borrowed it to pick something up. I asked him how much it was worth to him for me to take the fall, knowing she'd turn on him with the fury of her angry mama bear. And that's I got myself a new HD TV that year. When my best friend died, we figured he would have liked a sky burial kind of. So at the height of the funeral party we released his ashes into heavens with a giant balloon. After a few meters of flight the string has snapped, and his remains covered the mourning crowd. Everyone made their best efforts to get very drunk as soon as possible. We will never speak of this ever. One time I was taking a poop and feeling very faint. I started getting cold sweats, feeling dizzy and lightheaded. In a panic I shouted for my wife to come help me. As she entered the room I proceeded to faint, fall off the toilet and roll my body to side to prevent injury. Mid-fall a solid turd torpedoed out of my butt across the floor, leaving a trail of poop smear. When I came to, my wife was standing there in shock. I got up, grabbed some toilet paper and picked up my shame, and we never spoke of it again. My brother had an imaginary girlfriend with an imaginary Facebook profile. She would post loving, imaginary messages on his wall. I asked about her a few times, then got a little more persistent. After a while, I got suspicious and did an image search for her photos. They were for another person in another country. Also, no one ever saw the imaginary girlfriend. If someone asked me about her after seeing their loving Facebook exchanges, I would kind of imply that we'd met to spare my brother and myself embarrassment. Eventually, he stopped talking about the imaginary girlfriend and she stopped posting imaginary things. I will never ask what happened to her. I'm pretty sure he will never mention her again. She's still on Facebook. My husband and I work at the same small office. We were the first ones in that morning and other employees usually don't show up for another hour or so. There's only one bathroom on our floor as it's a small business. Anyway, I had just had some habanero spicy thing the day before and I was in for some punishment on this particular morning. I'm talking doubled over, clutching your stomach. Your farts are fire punishment. I hear a knock on the bathroom door and I assume it's my husband. Hang on, I'm having the habanero squirts. I'll be out as soon as I can. I groan out between awful spurting sounds. I hear a female voice awkwardly reply, "Oh, okay. Sorry Stacy for pulling you into my terrible morning." I got up one night to get some water and found that my teenage son was in the kitchen getting food. He was behind the kitchen counter, so I could only see him from the waist up. When he came around the counter into the hall, two things happened simultaneously. He noticed me, and his eyes grew wide in horror, and I saw that he was butt naked except for a pair of socks. He starts trying to panic run backwards on the tile floor. Imagine Scooby-Doo trying to run but getting stuck in place in a flurry of limbs, but ended up slipping and taking a hard seat on the tile. Worst of all, he dropped his hot pocket. I made sure he was okay, then went back to bed and laughed my ass off. Years later, we were driving and reminiscing about funny memories. I said, "Do you remember that night?" And he cut me off with, "Yes." I didn't even have to specify which night. We knew, and we were silent. My father and I had a porn Cold War. There has been a tacit agreement never to speak of it. We haven't. When I was a teenager, my mother found my hetero porn stash. Both parents confronted me with it when I got home from school, and of course confiscated it, and of course threw it in the bin. Or so I thought. Months later, I happened upon my collection, hidden at the bottom of my dad's wardrobe. Hidden from my mother, clearly. So I took it back and hid it in my bedroom. What's he going to do? Tell my mother I'd taken the porn he'd hidden from her that he was supposed to have thrown out? And he found it again, and took it back, and hid it, and I found it again, and took it back, and hid it. This went on for years, and it's never been mentioned, and it never will be. The time I showed my D to my father because I thought it was shrinking. I was 17. At school I ate something for lunch that didn't sit well with my stomach. Next thing I know I'm in my classroom hunched over feeling like my stomach is combusting. I go into the bathroom to find that my D has become short and black, with the skin crusty and dry. It felt like it would rip off if you tugged on it a little. When I got home I was hysterical because I thought I would lose my D, or that this was permanent. I decided to swallow my embarrassment and show my dad. We did nothing about it and eventually the skin went back to normal and my D grew back to an almost normal size. However, my D is not as long as it used to be, both erect and flaccid. Still to this day I don't know if the food I ate was the cause of it. It was just a slice of pizza. My dad and I have never spoken of that day. Update. I think it's important to note that I'm black and I have light brown skin, so it's possible that my D wasn't actually black but the contracted skin made it look darker in color and I confused it for turning black. Also, when I showed my dad my D looked almost normal. The skin wasn't as contracted and wasn't nearly as dry as it was when I looked in my school bathroom. That's why he decided not to take me to the hospital. My mom walked in on me getting a blowjob in high school. She immediately did a beeline in the opposite direction and said I didn't see anything. Then the girl and I went and ate dinner with them at our dinner table and we never spoke of it again. I had internal bleeding and really low blood pressure. I was in the hospital and instructed to not try to stand or walk since I'd faint. I didn't obey that. I went to take a piss and my girlfriend saw and chased after me. She caught up just in time to throw herself between me and the floor to prevent me from cracking my head open as I fell back unconscious. D out. Peeing all over everything on the way down. I awoke with her sandwiched between me and the tile floors, lying in a pool of my piss. And that's actually the moment I realized I should marry that girl. I did. But that's not the story I tell when someone asked, when did you know she was the one? Similar to the porn story that's already been posted, my dad and I have been in a bong stealing war for several years. I guess it's over now that I moved out though. When I was 16 they found my bong and confiscated it. Told me they were going to break it and toss it. A few months later, I found it in my dad's shed. Clearly it had been used since I last saw it. It was dirtier, and also it was stored next to some very itty weed. Come on, dad. So I took the bong back. And of course he couldn't say anything because he was supposed to have broken it. But he found it in my car several weeks later and took it again. Then I took it back from a different hiding spot in the shed. We've never mentioned it. And never will. Edit. My highest rated comment now is about stealing drug paraphernalia with my dad. I think I've peaked. I can die happy. I had surgery over the weekend and have been extremely constipated. Yesterday I was squatting over a toilet, crying with a jar of Vaseline sitting next to me. My friend, who had come to visit, opened the bathroom door and made eye contact with me as I was attempting to birth 5 days of fecal matter. She then slowly backed out and shut the door. The smoking hot guy I met the prior weekend asked me out and, naturally, I said yes, because I'd just met him. I asked if I could drive, and he said no problem. On the way to get some grub, we're cruising along with the perfect tunes playing in the car, windows down, on an absolutely beautiful night. He looks over, I look over, we're both just sparkling. You know, it was one of those moments where you want to take a mental snapshot. And then, I guess we must have driven through an area of something he was allergic to, because he sneezed a couple small ones. Then with one massive blow, honked a hoo-wad of snot oil over my windshield and dashboard. But, unbelievably, that's not the worst part. No. He pretended like it didn't happen, and went about talking, and scooping it up with his hands and smearing it onto his pants. Capital I was beyond mortified. I was throwing up in my mouth. My eyes were watering, and he didn't want me to pull over to get it cleaned up. We had to go to dinner like that, with snotty pants. Sigh. I ended up marrying him. We have never, ever spoken of it again. Not even 40 years later. Edit. Holy snot balls Batman. This has blown up. Thanks for all the excellent karma. Wish I could show the hubs to the post, but, yeah no. I tease in the vault. Not me but my father's story. During World War II, my father was a photographer for the 9th Army Air Corps. Most of the time it was ground based, but occasionally he flew. During the lead up to D-Day, he flew multiple missions in a bomber converted to a stereoscopic camera, 3D imagery, platform, The bomb bay had been gutted and the camera installed there. They would overfly France and take pictures until they either ran out of film or the Luftwaffe showed up. To minimize detection, they flew alone with the escort fighters circling out over the channel. In event of an attack, they'd drop until they were skimming the waves and run for England, passing under the fighters who'd engage the Germans while they fled. This, of course, didn't have its risks, and on more than one occasion they'd be caught too deep into France or the German fighters would get the drop on them and they'd have to man the guns. Crew size meant even the photographers had to man a gun. So with all that, here's a let's never speak of this again moment. They were still at a high altitude. One of the guns jammed and the gunner took off his glove and ended up freezing his hand to the metal of the gun. He's yelling for help and my dad goes over and says, "There's two ways to get your hand off. Either we yank it off and take the skin off your palm, or we use warm liquid." "I know of only one source of that. Never tell anybody about this," was said. Dad didn't keep his word, and thus was born the often told story of how my father pissed on a crewmate's hand and the guy thanked him for it. Edit. Thanks for the silver. Edit 2. It was urine. Some of Yael Methodicas need Jesus. So my friends and I were playing Never Have I Ever and I brought up that I'd never had a hickey. They decided to change that, so two of them pinned me down while two others sucked on opposite sides of my neck. No one was really sure how it got to that point, but it happened and hasn't been brought up since. This is my friend's story. She smoked weed a bit in high school but obviously hid it from her parents. This one time she came downstairs in the morning to find a joint sitting on the kitchen counter. She knew for sure it wasn't hers and that she wouldn't be stupid enough to leave one out like that. Her mother soon after walked downstairs and started cleaning up around the kitchen. When she ran into the joint, she paused, locked eyes for a bit with my friend, said "oh," and quickly brushed it into her hand and got rid of it. They both pretended it never happened. Last week, I was in the separate bathroom at work, pooping and just buying some time until the end of the day. There wasn't much to do. I accidentally had the door unlocked and this guy at my work opened it and saw me on the toilet. And I didn't know what to say, so I said hi. Before the end of the day I told him that, whatever that was, didn't happen. Edit. This guy who I work with. I was at a pool party in 8th grade. I think I may have been swimming around or sitting weirdly, but I remember a friend of mine told me, "Dude, I just saw your D." Me. "No you didn't." Friend, "You're right. I didn't." Never spoke about him seeing my D again. My wife and I were at my cousin's apartment in a big city. They have a balcony on the 40th something floor. We were all outside on the balcony drinking some beers and getting a little drunk. My wife rests her beer can, thank God it was a can and not a bottle or glass, on the railing of the balcony. I scold her and go to move it when my half drunk and clumsy self knocks it off and we watch in horror as it falls in slow motion 40 stories and hits the ground like a bullet next to a crowd of people. We never mentioned it to anyone. Had to stay with a work friend one night as we had a conference in his hometown the next day. It was weird enough staying in his spare room, but to top things off he had a fancy modern bathroom with a square toilet, which of course, I blocked in the morning with a turd the size of MT Fuji. After 30 minutes of fruitless searching for a plunger while the situation went from bad to worse, he knocked on the door and asked if I was okay. I had to tell him not to come in but to just hand me a ducking plunger and some bleach. Apparently his GF did the same thing the first night she stayed at his place, so at least I'm not alone. To this day I cannot look him in the eye at work. Edit. Ouch, my inbox. I get it. Everybody poops. 15 years old. I wander into the living room in my boxers, hand down the front, enjoying being home alone. President George W. Bush is on TV talking about cloning, with little understanding of what he is talking about. I yell at the top of my lungs, with Ducky D. When I was home alone and a teenager, I like to get wacky like this. Probably just an outlet of excess energy and my general facade of being a decent kid. Dance around, yell random things. Basically, if you saw me in private at any point in these years you would have thought I was mentally ill. Hell, maybe I am. Who can say? Unfortunately for me I was not home alone and my mom was in the living room watching this unfold. She yelled at me in shock at my behavior. It was probably top 10 most embarrassed I've ever been in my life, and it was never discussed again. My husband and I were going to Thanksgiving dinner at the house of some of my dad's family that I only kind of knew. We got there, knocked, and a woman I didn't recognize let us in. We went into the home and there wasn't anyone there. There was no dinner, etc. So we're making small talk with this lady and I ask when everyone is coming. She asks what I mean. Turns out we were at the wrong house. The woman just thought we were friends of her husband because he would randomly bring people home, and that we had simply arrived before he did. My divorced dad was playing horseshoes in a league with my aunt, mom's sister. They went together one night when I was about 16. I went to a friend's house to sleep over and didn't think any more of it until I got home the next morning and her car was still in the driveway. Innocent and stupid me went into the house expecting my aunt to maybe be crashed on the couch or something, and I heard a shower running and thought, weird, maybe she's taking a shower before she leaves. Then I heard my dad's laugh coming from the bathroom with my aunt laughing too. I tiptoed out of the house and went right back to my friend's house completely flabbergasted by what I just walked in on. Edit, thanks for the gold. I'll be sure to pass the good news on to my dad. Me and one of my friends were hanging out when we were probably 10 or 11. We went behind an elementary school on the weekend to play and ended up going behind a dumpster and getting naked and looking at each other. We never hung out again and every time we saw each other throughout high school it was a little weird. My parents had to help me get home after an unfortunate event with a dominatrix in Lithuania where I got robbed while strapped down naked on the bed. She took off and I had to be rescued by the Lithuanian police. I was about 15. Definitely old enough to know better. I was putting spiders and ice cubes on the super hot wood stove because the Leidenfrost effect was interesting. I thought it would be funny to do it with piss. It was not funny to do it with piss. For the uninitiated, what happens is the piss vaporizes and depending on the volume of your bladder, produces a thick and clearly visible dark brown cloud. If you can imagine the smog line in LA, it looks like that. That cloud hugs the ceiling and hangs down about a foot. It doesn't really move because it's water vapor and it leaves a film on everything it touches. It smells like dirt, well, like burnt piss. And you can also taste it. The cloud absolutely does not dissipate before your mother gets home from work. I was sort of a naughty kid anyhow, so she thought I had started a fire with something. In order to avoid a worse punishment I had to take dumb responsibility. That was the only time I can remember her looking at me with actual hatred. We were at a friend's hanging out. He invited a few girls over and one of the guys knew where his nut rag was kept. Someone went to the kitchen and used tongs to grab it and show off. The girls asked what it was and we began to just silently sit there thinking of something. Was having quite row sex with my ex-girlfriend and we thought we were home alone. So she decided that she'd scream the house down with her moaning. Screams duck me daddy really loudly and when we finish about 10 minutes later, we go to the bathroom to clean up, bump into her then 14-year-old brother on the landing and make direct eye contact with him. He just looks at me oddly and grimaces at his older sister. I still cringe to this day. Once my dad took us out for a spin in his new car in late December. This being me and my two older siblings, average age 13, SD 1.63, went around a bit, giving it the all raz, went around a corner and the car was sideways. Stars to tilt to about 50 degrees so we're all like duck this is it, here we go tumbling. Didn't tumble, just kinda waited for a bit then car slammed back onto the road. Made us promise to not tell mum, with the threat being that we wouldn't do anything fun ever again. Edit, added standard deviation to clear up the confusion. Maintaining that the car stars to tilt is basically nautical slang but with cars. A friend accidentally sent me a pic of his junk on Snapchat that was clearly meant for someone else. He excused himself 100 times. He has a huge ducking D though. In middle school my crush's mom and my mom drove the exact same SUV with similar license plates. After school one day I ran up, hopped in my mom's car and started talking when she didn't talk back and hadn't left the pickup line. I looked at her. She was not my mom. I looked to my right and my crush is standing outside the car looking at me like I was crazy. I sheepishly got out and ran a few cars back to my real mom. A few years later I had moved back to the area and was a cashier at a local store. My crush came through the line and recognized me and started to say, "Weren't you that girl who?" Where I just interrupted with a yes, handed him his change and quickly started the next customer. Saw my friend's mom topless by accident. We don't talk about it. Was weird going to his house the next day. Could not make eye contact with her after that. When I scored on the wrong hoop in a basketball game when I was 8, my sister unfortunately never signed the non-disclosure agreement. When I was college age, living at home but going to school, my dad worked night shift. Taking advantage of my usually empty house, he didn't get home until 11 AM or so. On a weekend I decided to duck the it out of my girlfriend at the time. And I did. And she was loud. Real loud. Like, nearly 2 decades of Christian repression looking to take itself out entirely on my D loud. We finish. Towel off. Whatever. Go downstairs and pass my dad's door on the way. It is now closed. It was for sure open earlier. Look outside. His car is in the driveway. I can hear his TV in his room. Our rooms shared a wall, the headboard of each bed. He never brought it up again. Before this, I had a girl from work over super late but no place to do stuff. So we ended up on the tailgate of my grandpa's truck, parked outside in the open in an alley in town. Also important, my dad's bedroom window faces this, but I thought he was asleep. We have a 6. It's fine. She leaves. I go back in. Next morning my dad says, "Why, was there a girl here last night?" "We were just talking." "Talking? Huh, yeah." Then he kind of gives me that eye ducking no look and says, "Alright. Talking." I got into a car accident for the first time in my life when my younger brother was visiting me. I wasn't paying attention. Dumb. To the car in front of me and I rear-ended them pretty hard. Luckily no one was hurt. We exchanged information. Took pictures. But there was no noticeable damage, so we left it at that. I looked at my brother and we both agreed never to bring it up again. I gave him that car when he turned 18. After a house party when I was a teenager, me and my friend both passed out on my bed. About 2-3 hours later I woke up with horrendous cramp in my leg, so I've sat on the edge of the bed massaging it trying to get rid of it. My friend woke up and thought I was masturbating but got too awkward to ask WTF was going on. He never said anything until the next morning when he was giving me a weird look. I'd prefer we never speak of it again. He loves twisting the story to any girls on nights out.